Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in, come in, come in, come in. This is the ArcCast podcast put out by the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative. And this is the podcast where we talk about, we talk a lot about podcasting, don't we? And because it's important. And how is the industry growing? What are the latest things that you need to know about? Why do I receive calls when I start recording? That's a great mystery, I guess. Anytime I want to have a phone call, I should just start a podcast. But anyways, the skies are getting bluer and Spotify is getting larger, depending however you want to look at it. We've got a lot of things to cover today. And so we're going to run you through some of the news subjects today. And then we're going to get into our interview with the host of the 8th and H podcast. And then we'll leave you off with some good things. And so let's start off with the big news that has come up this past few weeks, which is Spotify for podcasters is no more. It's been laid in its grave. Okay. Spotify for creators has risen in its place. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? There's lots to consider here. One of the main things is that the big change is the name itself, right? So it used to be Spotify for podcasters, and now it's Spotify for creators. Okay, so those words being switched around, podcasters for creators, the lines are getting blurred between what is a podcaster and what is a creator. Essentially, if you've been keeping up to date with all the latest trends, and if you've been posting videos on YouTube, if you've been taking shorts and clips from your podcast and then using those as reels and shorts on Facebook and YouTube and TikTok, then technically you're a creator now, what they call a creator, a digital creator. So there's not really a distinction anymore between what a podcaster and a creator is. And so that's the purpose of the name. And also because Spotify wants to cater its service to be more for the people who want to be those types of digital creators. And so we're getting into a place where more and more the audio only podcasts are going to be a thing that's sort of niche. I wouldn't say it's left behind in the past and it's not dying out, but it is going to be very niche. And so there's going to be a very exclusive club of people who create audio only podcasts. And there will be an exclusive club of people who listen to only audio podcasts. Okay. So I don't see that trend growing, but the trend of growth is going to be in the amount of people that watch videos and the people that create videos inevitably. So Spotify is trying to assist, I would say, in helping with that creation process. And this is not just purely out of the good of their heart. Okay, this is obviously that they want to be the number one podcasting platform. For a while now, for the past, I would say, I think month now, YouTube has become the number one platform for podcasters. Usually it's number 3, and Spotify and Apple sort of trade places on number 1 and 2. But now we have YouTube at the top, and Spotify is quickly coming for the crown. And so the new platform for Spotify for creators, if you're hosting your podcast through them, or even if you're wanting to get more access to tools to help you grow your podcast on Spotify, then you're going to be using this new platform, which is Spotify for creators. And so here's the big difference. Before, you could upload, I remember back in Anchor, right? So I started when it was called Anchor before it was Spotify for podcasters. It was audio only. And then Spotify for podcasters, or Spotify for podcasters. Geez, can we come up with an easier name? Spotify for podcasters came in and they promoted video eventually. Okay, so that if somebody has a premium account for Spotify, if they're paying that monthly premium or a yearly premium on their Spotify account, then they can see the video version of a podcast. Okay. So that obviously has changed now to where it's more about the amount of premium accounts that can watch your video and how long do they watch your video, because there's several different things to talk here. One is, how does it change the way that you upload your episodes. And this is the way that Spotify wants you to do it. They want you to upload your video podcast. And of course, they will strip the audio from it and send it out to all the audio only podcasts like Apple and iHeart. But the video will only exist on Spotify. Okay. They want to be able to push that podcast video out to more listeners who would be more likely to be interested in your subject matter. Okay. Each one of these podcast platforms has its own algorithm. So we know that. We know that whenever you go to that first page of either Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube, you're going to be recommended some things that you've already listened to, some shows by people who you listen to other shows, but you haven't listened to that episode. Or you're going to be recommended some shows by similar types of creators or similar types of shows. So they want you to spend as much time on their platform as possible. So in order to do that, they've seen the numbers in engagement for video. Obviously, it works for YouTube. It has worked for YouTube for a very long time. I'm kind of shocked that it has taken this long for podcasts to actually catch up. So this is really going to be a test because we're going to see if the amount of work is worth the reward, right? So that's where we come to the point number 2, which is how does it benefit you as a creator, right? So you definitely want to be able to take advantage of the tools to reach more listeners. And so that's one way, So obviously, if you're ticking all the box that Spotify says, hey, here's this list of new things that you can do for your podcast, you can bet money that your podcast is going to be recommended more if you tick off all those boxes. Spotify is going to have a priority to boost those podcasts that do that. Okay. So that's one incentive to be able to do it. But there is a new rewards program through Spotify, which will start in January. So you can actually get paid for your content. You can get paid for the amount of listeners, similar to what YouTube does, similar to what TikTok does. You can get paid for the amount of listeners that listen to your podcast on their platform. And the thing is that the bar is kind of high. It's a great offer, but the bar is really high. So it's going to be kind of exclusive for just a handful of podcasts for the first bit. Even though this is a free to use platform and anybody is open to share their podcast, when it comes to earning money from the views, this is what you have to tick off. Okay, so start from this. Earn from ads and premium video revenue. Okay, so what that means is that anytime people listen to an ad on your podcast, these aren't the pre-recorded ones. These are the ones that Spotify puts onto your podcast because you said that they could do that. Anytime someone watches those ads, or if someone with a premium account watches your video podcast, then you start earning money. I don't have exact dollar amounts of what the translation is there. I would imagine it's something similar to YouTube. But you also have to hit 2,000 people who streamed on Spotify in the last 30 days. So they want you to prioritize Spotify, obviously, because 2,000 people who streamed your episodes in the past 30 days, that's kind of hefty, right? Especially if you're trying to upload your podcast across several different places, from Apple to iHeart to YouTube, and you're also trying to market. So there's a lot of work that they want the majority of your time to go into Spotify, because they want you to hit that 2,000 mark where 2,000 people have streamed your podcast in the last 30 days. And that's not even 2,000 listens, right? So they can't double up. This is 2,000 completely unique people who have streamed in the last 30 days. You got to hit 10,000 in consumption hours in the last 30 days. So in total of the last 30 days, you've got to have 2,000 listeners at least, and they have to have consumed your podcast for at least 10,000 hours. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if this is realistic. I mean, obviously this is realistic for like the huge podcasts that have a tons of listeners, and it's not really hard for them to hit it. And maybe this is what the slow rollout is for, right? Maybe it's for those creators rather than the independent creator. But we will see how this works out because, again, the algorithm is more likely to push out your podcast whenever you start ticking off the boxes. So maybe more of those independent creators can get to these levels where they're having 2,000 people stream in the last 30 days, plus the 10,000 consumption hours in the last 30 days. But another thing that this says is that, if we're reading between the lines, right? So they want you to hit 10,000 consumption hours in 30 days. Guess what? If your podcast is 35 minutes long, reaching that 10,000 hour consumption in 30 days, you're kind of doubling up or even tripling or quadrupling the amount of work that you would have to put in to get people to listen to your podcast. And so I haven't done the math on, but like 2,000 people times 35 minutes. So 2,000 times 35. Does that equal 10,000? I'll do that real quick. But anyway, so you've got to do the 10,000 hours of consumption in the past 30 days. What that will do is encourage you to create longer episodes or to create more often, because it doesn't have to be 2,000 people that listen to one episode. It could be any of your episodes. And so maybe it's some episodes, if you've got some in the bank or some that you have put out years ago and you want to like rehash those and repost them, perfectly fine to do. Those count as new episodes and may draw some attention and garner more listens across the entirety of your catalog. But let's see, 2,000 times 35. Yeah, so 70,000 minutes divided by 60, 1,166. And so you would have to get, let's say, about 11,000 of those. That's a lot. I'm pretty sure I didn't do that math right, but it's thousands. And so what we'll encourage you to do is actually, maybe get those older episodes and put a new intro. Hey, this is an episode that we're bringing back, Flashback Wednesday or whatever you want to call it. And then you bring in episodes to sort of draw attention to your podcast. If you've got that kind of catalog, if you're a newer show, then absolutely what you're going to have to do to make up for those consumption hours is to make your show longer and enticing. You're going to have to make it to where there's some big bang at the end where people want to stay tuned. They want to stay engaged with your content. And so your 35-minute podcast may not be 35 minutes anymore. It may be an hour. It may be an hour and a half, or you can do, which their prized possession is Joe Rogan. So his go 3 hours plus. So I can't even imagine sitting here and talking for 3 hours plus. But yeah, they definitely want you to create longer episodes in video and then post those and then publish. This is the last one. You've got to publish at least 12 episodes. So if you're a new podcast, the likelihood that you're going to be able to do this right in January, probably not, because you're going to have to get a few episodes under your belt. And so for you that do have 12 episodes already there, and you're close to the 2,000 people who stream every 30 days, and maybe your 10,000 consumption hours for the last 30 days. If you're there, then you're going to start earning some cash as long as you opt into the revenue program through Spotify. So make sure you log in and try to see what the requisites are for that for you and be able to apply to start receiving your funds. Don't leave any money on the table. And we never leave money on the table. So that's one way of monetizing your podcast with the new Spotify for creators. The other part, and the last part I want to talk about, is that there is a subscription level, right? So you can start allowing people to subscribe to your podcast on Spotify for the premium content, whatever it is that you want to offer them, in order for them giving you money. These are paid memberships that people give to you, and they subscribe not just for the free subscribe, but they pay for the subscription for you to deliver some sort of extra little kickback. In order to reach that, you have to reach 100 people who streamed on Spotify. I don't have a specification down here for if it was in the last 30 days or just total. But 100 people in the last 30 days is not really that high of a bar. And then you have to publish at least 2 episodes. So if you're a newer podcast, or even if you've been around, you've been sort of struggling with, getting more of an audience for your podcast, you're going to be able to get these paid subscriptions on pretty soon. Okay. And I think that's what their tactic is here. I think their earning revenue from video streams and from ads is aimed at more of the bigger podcasts that are being produced by iHeart or, Wondery or something like that, where obviously they have a bigger, marketing budget and a bigger reach, for a proven track record of creating good content, right? So, excuse me. While the independent creator can hit that 100 people that have streamed on Spotify and then publish at least 2 episodes. And remember, these numbers are exclusive to Spotify, so they don't count if, let's say, you had 50 people stream on Spotify, but then you had 50 people stream on Apple. That doesn't count. You've got to have 100 people that have streamed specifically on Spotify. So there is that. Another thing I wanted to talk about with Spotify for creators is that there is a new ability to market your podcast with I don't know if we're calling it, they call them clips, right? So, them, you consume them all the time. If you're on the internet right now, you have consumed this. If you're on TikTok, you know what I'm talking about. If you're on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. So those short vertical videos that fit perfectly on a phone screen, and so Reels on Facebook and Instagram, they've got to be 90 seconds or less. The ones on YouTube, I believe, are under 3 minutes. And then the ones on TikTok can be up to 10 minutes, right? So we know those short form videos that we use to promote our podcast, right? So you record in video, you make those little clips, then you promote them across all social media platforms. Well, Spotify wants to be another social media platform that you use for those clips. And so what they want you to do is when you upload your podcast episode, you're going to hit these little 3 dots that are next to it after you've already posted your episode, and then you can upload a clip. I haven't seen personally on the app where they are posting these clips. I assume that's probably going to be coming later on in the year, maybe in January. But I know there are some places where you can go and you sort of see these little micro clips, similar to if you used a YouTube Music app. Like if you go there to the clip section, it'll just keep rolling through and you get a little sampling of everything. So not really sure how effective these clips are going to be, but it's another place where you can create a clip and upload it. Well, not create it, but you upload it there. Will this shake out to be something that is worth your time? I don't honestly know, but I just uploaded my first episode of a podcast since the changeover from Spotify for podcasters to Spotify for creators. And this is the workflow that I had to go through, right? I record on 3 different cameras, one for the guest, one for the host, and one that covers both of them. And then I record each microphone on the audio interface. I go back into editing and I line up the audio with the video. And then I get to do my edits and go in switching back and forth between all the cameras. I record an intro, put their intro on there. I record an outro for YouTube specifically now to say, hey, if you like this video, then make sure you like and subscribe and share this video. And then I had to export that video and upload it to YouTube. And then I make another outro for the podcast. If you liked this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single episode in the upcoming. Okay, so even though people will see it on video on Spotify, Spotify's also taken the audio from that video that you upload and putting it across Apple and everywhere else. So those people won't see if you say, thanks for watching. They are a little confused because they can't watch. There's nothing to watch. It's only audio, right? So you kind of have to speak to both audiences. Yes, that adds work. Plus the clips. I'm not sure how long the clips are supposed to be or how long it benefits to be, because I haven't seen any analytics come back on any of these clips that Spotify is allowing to come up. With YouTube and TikTok, you can look and see directly how many people are interacting with your content, but can't see that with Spotify. So I'm keeping it under 60 seconds, uploading a short there, and then since it's 60 seconds, I can also upload it to, Facebook and YouTube and TikTok. But the thing is, if you're a creator on TikTok and you're in the getting the rewards program for being a creator, TikTok will not pay you for a clip that's under a minute under a minute, right? So you have to have a clip that's over a minute in order to start earning money from views. So hopefully Spotify will clarify, how long clips should be, what are people interacting with, and also can we start earning from those clips? Because if I could, let's say that for the same content, right, you make a clip that is 1 minute and 30 seconds long, you upload it to TikTok, and after several thousands of views, you make maybe $15 off of the clip, right? So it depends on how successful that is. I've seen everything from $15 to another account that I manage made $400 off of one clip. And so if something goes viral, then of course you make more money off of that. So that's 1 minute and 30. And then if I cut one down to 60 seconds, which is a little bit of work, because you don't recommend using AI to do your clips, making sure you cut during your own cutting because people respond more to those. And plus, more of a human element. Taking a clip, making it 60 seconds, and then posting it on Spotify, but that's just for Spotify. Is it extra busy work that doesn't have a reward? I don't know. That's something that we're going to have to see. We're going to have to watch. We're going to find out. And so we will definitely be paying attention to that because it benefits everyone, whenever we, pay attention to the latest trends and what's happening in podcasting. And of course, what are the best tools to use? And so it is interesting. I will say that I do like the idea that they're moving in a video direction. I used to have a paid Spotify account, but even when they started doing video, I never watched the video. I went to Spotify just for music. I'd listened to a few podcasts, but I just wanted to have my phone in my pocket while I walked. You know what I mean? I didn't want to specifically sit in front of my computer or phone and watch, that podcast episode, but apparently a lot of people are doing it. But another, big amount of people that are on the internet have talked about, and they complained that Spotify is, kind of cut a name for itself by being the music app. Right. But they're sort of, they think this is a bad move. And I don't know. Honestly, I don't really have a strong opinion on that because while it seems like they had the market corner for music because Apple Music has tried to catch up to it. YouTube Music has tried to, there's several different apps that try to measure up to what, Spotify has managed to capture in music. For them to realign themselves and try to be a competitor with YouTube, I don't know if it'll work, but I can say that, Amazon started off as an online bookstore, right? And that was exclusively all they did. I remember I used to order books on Amazon.com back in the late 90s. But look at Amazon now. You can order a vacuum cleaner, you can order tissues, and you can order hats, you can order, gift cards, whatever you want, and get it off Amazon and have it at your door the next day, right? So it worked for them. Not saying that it can't work for Spotify doing this move towards podcasting and creation through video and trying to be a competitor with YouTube. Okay. All right. Well, on to the next thing. Skies are getting bluer. Apparently, BlueSky, which is a social media app, that came out in, I believe, 2021 is the first time that it really came out. I've had an account on BlueSky since last year when I heard about it. I always subscribe and sign up for any new social media app that comes out. But a lot of people have left X, which is formerly Twitter, and gone to over 1 million people have signed up over the past week for BlueSky accounts. Okay. BlueSky is a direct competitor to X. Okay, but what we want to know is it worth your time? As with anything else that we sort of look at, is BlueSky going to be worth your time as a podcaster who is trying to get your podcast seen? It really depends. I've seen several companies already make BlueSky accounts that are big in the podcasting industry. I've seen lots of podcasts join BlueSky and then encourage their followers to come follow them on BlueSky. And a couple of them are in the top 10 accounts on BlueSky right now. Okay, so here's the thing. BlueSky does not allow for paid advertising the way that you can on, let's say, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And so that's kind of their whole thing, or even X, whenever you could pay for, you can still post something that is promotional in its nature, right? But you can't boost that post yet. You can't pay for that post to be viewed by more people. And so there is a sort of a wall there whenever you do create an account where people kind of have to peep around the wall to be able to find you. And you're not in the town square, I think it is worth your time to go ahead and grab the username that you want to use for your podcast if BlueSky does become a sort of fertile ground for promoting your podcast. As of right now, a lot of people are not going to find you unless you are actively telling people to go and follow you at BlueSky from outside of BlueSky. So if you're using your podcast, if you're using YouTube, if you're using Shorts, if you're using posts on all the social media platforms and telling your followers, hey, come follow us at BlueSky, that's where we'll be most active, and we will send out, I'm not sure what they're calling them. So Twitter used to be tweets, and X, I've heard some interesting things be called. But whenever you send out a message on BlueSky, we'll say, or BlueSky, as lots of people like to say. And that's one way of garnering a follower ship and a base of people that are engaging with your content there. Otherwise, you're kind of just shouting out into the void and hoping that somebody hears you or stumbles upon your voice, right? So, but also it is also just as a social media platform. I mean, because it doesn't have all the advertising, it doesn't have all the paid ads and stuff. It is more of a if you're a better place to have great conversations or to just see what's out there without being paid to watch something, or without the algorithm sort of manipulating what you engage with. So with that, it's that's your thing, then absolutely worth it for that. So as of for right now, it's not hugely, I don't see a huge advantage of getting on BlueSky. I've seen a few other platforms that have come up and try to be competitors as well. And I still use some I have completely forgotten about. One was called like Simple Social or something like that. And like it quickly died within a few days. Then there was Mammoth. And then of course Threads, which is, Meta's alternative to X, which I use Threads still every once in a while. I'll peep in about once a week and maybe just see who's interacted with my stuff and make a few posts just right there. I also have it set to where anytime I make a post on Instagram, it goes to Facebook and to Threads at the same time. That way I'm kind of killing 3 birds with one stone. But yeah, so BlueSky is growing, and that could easily plateau. It could also just completely go down. I don't know. So, but if it is your thing that you want to be able to reach, a non-toxic environment and to promote your podcast, and then to build a followership, like if you're willing to put the work in, I think it's well worth it. But it is going to be a lot of work. And I know that as podcasters, our time is extremely valuable and we're being pulled in a billion different directions at once. And so maybe another social media tool just might not be worth it just yet. But I would go ahead and grab your username just in case. That way, if it does get to a point to where you want to use it, then you have that username and nobody else has that. Right. Okay, so one of the best things about, being part of the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative and being executive director and the founder of all these different things, and like the way we're just moving and shaking in Arkansas and across the U.S. and be able to speak at Podcast Movement. I met an extraordinary podcast host at one of the meetups I was hosting in Washington, D.C. for Podcasters with a Cause. And I had the chance to sit down and have a great conversation with the host of 8th and H, or The Alley, which is about the 8th and H case. If you don't know what that is, then you're in the same boat as I was. If you do know what it is, then you're much more intelligent and pay more attention to the news than I do. And so it was a huge case that is sort of still ongoing. Today, actually, they have an incredible event that they are updating their podcast feed on. But yes, I highly recommend you go listen to The Alley, 8th and H. But here is my talk with Shannon.
She is an audio journalist, a podcast producer with an impressive career in podcasting. You're a production lead, studio manager for New America, and I personally think an amazing storyteller. Shannon Lynch, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you agreed to come on the show and to talk about this amazing case that you covered with the Alley. And definitely want to talk and cover some of the basics in case anyone isn't too familiar with the the podcast series, and then move into some of the deeper questions about it and how it kind of affects not just. Well, there's so many different areas we need to go into, right? So let's just start with the beginning. So you are a podcast producer, right? If you don't mind, just a little bit about your background. I know you've worked for Sirius before. Can you just move like a short version? I'm sure there's a long story behind it, but a short version.
Yeah, I can try and do as short as possible. I am hearing a little bit of an echo of myself, but it's not too distracting. So I don't know if that's just coming from your headphones or something back into your mic.
That's interesting. Okay.
It's very slight. Okay. But yeah, so quick version. I came to DC to study politics. I wanted to work in politics, and ended up changing my mind, and pursuing a master's in audio engineering of all things, because I thought I was going to work in audio engineering for music. But then I realized, as you mentioned, I worked at SiriusXM. When I was an intern at SiriusXM, I realized that I could actually combine those interests and do political audio. So I've been working as a political audio journalist for over 8 years now. Started with talk shows and news shows at SiriusXM, and then a little over 5 years ago moved over to New America, which is a think tank that does policy research on various areas of political reform, and we publish our research in hopes that it may be used in legislation.
That's incredible. And so you went from music to doing something that could potentially, change the lives of a lot of people, future and people that are, presently affected by it, which is incredible. So yeah, it's amazing. What kind of music? Just curious, what kind of music were you going to go into production for?
I sang, so I was mostly interested in producing myself, but kind of like R&B, and or like jazz or soul. But I realized pretty quickly that was kind of boring to me. I wanted, I still had this very strong interest in politics and always have, and wanted something that would challenge me in that field. So this just ended up being a better fit that I didn't necessarily see going into it, but kind of stumbled upon it, and it's worked out.
That's awesome. Yeah. Wow. You could be on stage performing and doing all kinds of things, but yeah, you're doing this, which is, I think, I feel the same way. I think about, the work where you put your talents. Like you could, put all your talents into one area, and yes, it gives you, a moment in, when you're in front of the cameras, right? And so like people are noticing you and they're applauding your talents and stuff, or you can put that in somewhere where it actually makes changes for other people and make lasting, the ripple effect, right? You're affecting one person, it affects everybody that's around them, and on and on and on. Which obviously has moved you to cover, a lot of the different things that you have. But like one of the things we definitely want to talk about is the Alley, DC's 8th and H case, which is, I had not, I confess, I'd never heard of it before you brought it up to me when I met you in a podcast movement. But digging in, like it's a rabbit hole, right? And so it's such a complicated case because of how muddied it got along the way. You know what I mean? The more people tried to get involved and help, it seemed like it made the case more, complicated, and of course affected the lives of the 8 guys that were convicted of this. So just a little bit of backstory in case somebody is not familiar with the 8th and H case. Can you give me a brief little rundown of that?
Yeah, like you said, it is a massive case, so I'll try and simplify this as best I can. But in 1984, a woman was murdered in an alley in Northeast DC. Her name was Catherine Fuller. What ended up happening with the ensuing investigation was the Metropolitan Police Department decided on a theory of a gang rape and murder very early on, essentially formed this tunnel vision of this was going to be their theory that they were going to follow through with, ended up arresting 17 young Black Washingtonians for this crime. And similar to the Central Park 5 case in many ways, but in the most crucial way, there were multiple false confessions in the same way there was in the Central Park 5 case. And then in the following trial, there was prosecutor misconduct in the form of hiding some very important evidence from the defense attorneys. So unfortunately, this case is a pretty valuable or good illustration of how things can go really, really wrong for people in our criminal justice system, especially people of color in the American criminal justice system. As you mentioned, 8 young men were sentenced to life for a crime they did not commit, and they're now seeking a presidential pardon.
Wow. So in you said 85, right? That's not the year? But the crime happened in...
The crime happened in 84. The trial
84.
Was 85.
That's right. So 84. We were, 30... Is that right? It said we are 90s, 2000s, 2010s. Yeah. So we're 40 years later now?
Yes. So
okay,
on October 1st, it'll be exactly 40 years ago that this happened.
Wow. So 40 years later, these men that were convicted, and, we can talk about how, listening to your own podcast, by the way, it's incredible. You're such a good storyteller in a way that you're breaking down this story. Like I said, this is a complicated case, and I sort of went down the rabbit hole whenever you told me about this, and I started listening to your podcast series. I had a plane flight, and I started from takeoff until landing, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And taking notes and then go and looking up things on the internet. But like this case, which starts off with a woman is found in the garage in DC, and then somebody finds her, but moving past those parts, but moving forward a little bit to where the 2 detectives that are assigned aren't even like street detectives, and they don't have any experience in this type of thing. And so I don't understand like what they were basing a lot of their assumptions on, where they said, well, this could not have happened any other way than if a gang of people had committed this. I have a number of people. So yeah, it's an incredible case to go down. I highly encourage anybody that's listening to listen to the alley, of course, but also look at the case, look at the details, and see how that all went and how it happened. I have some questions more for you about some of the things that some of the judges did, and when they were trying to get an appeal going. But yeah, again, you're such a good storyteller and being able to take this hugely complicated case and knowing how to not only word it and present it, but also know to where this is how we're going to make chapters out of this story. This is where this block of the story ends. This is where this picks up. And I'm curious about your process of going through that, because I'm sure you did a ton of research on this, and then before making a hard decision of this is how we're going to break it up.
Yeah. I worked on this series for 2 years before we published the first episode. And to be honest with you, that part exactly of writing this story and putting it into chapters in this sense, in episodes, was definitely the hardest thing for me. The research, was fascinating to me. And I got to, interview a ton of really interesting people that had great perspectives on the story. But I kind of just, for my own process, from the beginning, kind of mapped out, this is where I think there would be breaks in the story where there could be cliffhangers from one chapter, one episode to the next. And I kind of just started from there. I did not write the scripts for the narration. Basically, I didn't write it in order necessarily. So, I would start on the first one and then would, put something in the third one based on something I was researching at that time that I thought was going to fit into that part of the story. So it was definitely not linear. And also, there were times when I was writing for hours, and then there were days where I just couldn't figure out what to put down on the paper at all. So I think that's super normal, and something to keep in mind for anyone that's trying to do a narrative series, that everyone does it a little differently, and it's not gonna be a clear shot from start to finish.
Yeah, for sure. And the interviews that you were talking about, you're kind of asking them to live, and to relive, I guess, some of the most traumatic times of their life, and they're recounting these stories. What's your process, I guess, ethically, whenever you're talking to people and you're interviewing them and asking them to recount these things? What is your process in helping them be feeling comfortable, telling their story while not, feeling like they're being, exploited or attacked?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I felt from the very beginning when I started working on this in mid-2021, I only wanted to do this if the accused men wanted to be part of it. I wasn't interested in telling this story on their behalf. I wanted them to be able to use their own voices, tell their own stories. So way before I recorded interviews with them, now that I think about it, it was from the first time I started talking to them and the first interview that I recorded with any of the accused men was a year. And I was doing research this whole time and getting to know them, and met them in person. Mind you, this was still middle of COVID, so had more communication virtually, but it wasn't a situation where I just emailed them and said, I'm doing this project. Will you come to my studio? Let's do this interview. There was a lot that led up to it before that. I also, and that, that was part of the trust building process. I wanted them to know that I had their best interest at heart. And then the other part of it, too, I think, is when you do have someone in your studio that's gone through things that are just unimaginable, the tone of the interview is obviously very different. And I made it very clear to them from the start. First of all, I did give them questions in advance. I know people have really strong feelings on whether to or to not give questions in advance. I absolutely decided that was needed for this, because for several of these men, this was the first time that they were telling this story to anyone. So I wanted them to feel really comfortable in that sense. And then also, you know, when it was time to come into the studio, making it really clear that, you know, that it was a safe space. If anything came up that they didn't want to talk about, they could just say, I don't want to talk about this, or, you know, I want to say that a different way. Can you not use this specific version of how I just explained that? Because, yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, if you think about the worst thing that's happened to you in your life, and then you have to sit down in a room with someone for 2+ hours to relive all of it, I mean, there's no way that you're going to get anything productive out of that unless you do build a lot of trust and create, you know, for lack of a better term, a safe space for people to be able to express their feelings and what they've experienced.
No, absolutely, yeah, for sure. And it's amazing that some of the conversations, and you must have made them feel, you know, relaxed, because the stories that they do tell and their answers to your questions are, you know, they're not too, I want to say, like they don't feel angry, you know what I mean? Which I feel like I would be in their position, where it's like all of this has happened and like repeatedly, you're being run over by so many different areas, and from, you know, the accusations to the detectives to the judges and everything else. But like you're coming in as sort of well, you are an ally, right? So you're trying to achieve helping them in their life getting better in the future, but to make them feel comfortable enough to where they're telling this in such a calm manner and recounting a lot of those details and not sounding too angry about it, but like doing a great job of relaying the information of how everything happened. It was really incredible to listen to. I particularly like the last episode when you revisited the alley with the guys that are out. And just, that was like, I don't know, it impacted me just, you know, the emotional, you know, from the listener perspective. You spent this whole trip of every episode walking through these guys' life and being like impacted, of saying, oh, that's horrible. How could a human being be treated this way in America, right? How can this be, you know, our justice system and how it has handled this case, or how these guys have been, you know, mistreated along the way. And then the ones that are still surviving now, there's 6, right? 6 survivors as far as now, yeah. To revisit that same alley with you while you're recording and talking, and they're explaining, they're pointing it out, like that's incredible. What was that like to revisit that place?
Yeah, you know, but before that recording took place, I had walked up and down that alley more times than I can count, many times. I think I mentioned in the podcast series, I lived in that neighborhood when I started working on this project, so I was very familiar with it. But yeah, it definitely, it was like time travel in a sense, walking with Cliff and Chris through the alley and really just around that whole block, and them describing how different the neighborhood is now. And I mean, that's something we get into in the podcast. It is another big part of this story of gentrification in DC and how much that neighborhood has changed since then. And because of the conditions that the neighborhood was in at the time, how that affected the case and how these young men were treated. But I think, you know, for them, I think that there's some sense of healing in to whatever level that is possible at this point, to explaining to people how things actually were, how they experienced that block as kids, because when they were kids and they were very young when they were arrested, they weren't taken for their word for how they described their reality in their neighborhood. Yeah, it was a really special moment for sure.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So going forward with this story, obviously all the guys are out now. 2 that were convicted have passed away. They're no longer with us. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So for the 6 men that are remaining, probably wrongfully convicted. I think most would agree, wrongfully convicted. You guys are going after sort of a presidential pardon, you mentioned. So many questions about that. First of all, I guess I know that New America is a think tank, and so going after, and I love that quote. I wrote that down because I definitely wanted to talk about. We are dedicated to renewing the promise of America. That's such an interesting concept. I recently was listening to a podcast series called Superman versus the KKK, and it was talking about the old radio serials from back in the 1920s and how the KKK were also taking out ads on the radio at the same time, but running it as, they were disguising their belief system as, they would just call it the American way, which is really interesting because I saw a lot of, crossover here with the story that you're covering, and things like that, and the gentrification of that neighborhood, like you're talking about. And so, like, what is it to be, what does that even mean to be an American, or to be the American way, or like the promise of America? Like, what is the promise of America, and are we exemplifying that, or are we showing that? Does our system back it up, and does it support it? And where are we, I guess, as a people, to where something like this happens, 1984, 40 years later, these men are still fighting just to have their basic, rights given back to them in the country that they live in the capital city of their government. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'd love to know, how you guys are going about trying to get them the presidential pardon, for one, but also, how did you get New America to jump on board for using a podcast to help with that, I guess, as a tool to sort of move it forward?
Yeah. So just to be clear, the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project is the driving force behind the presidential pardon. They've been working with these guys since, I want to say, 2005, so almost 20 years, trying to find some remedy to this injustice. They ended up putting together this all-star team of lawyers that have been working on these applications for the past more than a year. And so the lawyers and the accused men worked together to submit this pardon application. New America wasn't part of the actual writing and submitting of those pardons. What we were part of is spreading awareness of their story and what happened to them through the podcast. I would say, the promise of America at our very founding core is that all men are created equal. And of course, at the time, that meant something very different to our founders, our framers, than it does today. But the core of that statement remains, and that's this great American experiment, which I think people forget was a crazy idea at the time, that we would be a republic democracy, ruled by the people for the people. Our entire existence has been trying to inch closer and closer and closer to that promise of America, that we all are created equal and we deserve equal rights among us. And I mean, make no mistake, there has been slow progress towards that, but we still have a long way to go. In this instance, this happened 40 years ago, but there are folks that are locked up for crimes they didn't commit all the time still because of the inequity in our criminal justice system. And, that's very much part of realizing the promise of America is, hopefully we live in a country one day where everyone is treated as equally as possible in our courts and in our criminal justice system.
Do you think that, creating equity within the justice system and the courts, do you think that is heavily affected how, communities and society itself, us as Americans, like the population of America, like how we treat equity?
I'm not sure I follow.
It's a tough question. So, the way that just the people who aren't involved in the justice system, right? So, lots of times, going through this case, watching that episode from the Netflix series that covered this in that one episode, they were talking about how the evidence that was that was out there was so public that even though it was the false evidence, I guess they were saying that it had to be a gang of guys, and and nothing else could have done this except for a gang, and even calling them a gang itself, that was put out there so much that the general public view was some gang members did this, and that was, even though there's no evidence to back it up, and sort of. It seems like it made it easier for courts and for juries to be influenced by that was out there, even though it was false, reporting and false evidence. There wasn't anything to back it up. But it seems like because that was so widely accepted that it was easier to convict them of a crime that they couldn't prove that they actually even committed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess for courts and justice system itself now, does that start with the equity in the courts? Does that start with equity in the people? I guess I'd say.
I see what you mean. So yes, I mean, and in particularly equity in media, and how these things are covered. We focus a lot on the Washington Post coverage of this case leading up to the trial because they were so instrumental in how the public viewed these defendants. If you listen to the podcast, you'll hear from Patrice Gaines, who was a reporter at the Washington Post at that time, and she will describe that it was much more common in that day and age, at least at the Washington Post, to take police officers for their word. If they said they had this or that evidence and this was how the crime happened, there wasn't a ton of pushback. I think that there's a lot more pushback today in reporting, and not to say that there are still things that police officers say that are just printed as fact. That still happens for sure. But I think that it's part of that, external system of checks and balances, really. That's why good investigative journalism is so important to our democracy, because a good investigative journalist will ask these questions and challenge what's presented to them, and that just simply was not happening here. The detectives said this was a gang, this was a gang rape and murder. This is how it happened, and there was very little pushback on, well, wait, what if this isn't actually a gang? What if there was only one person that committed this crime, or one or two people? It was just taken at face value and not challenged, and because of that, these young men, before they even stepped foot in the courthouse, were presumed guilty by most of the public, overwhelmingly. And of course, that's not an equitable system for criminal justice if someone is, tried and convicted before they even get to trial. So the media has a big part to play in equity in the criminal justice system. But also, too, I mean, make no mistake, there are some internal things that I can go into if you want me to, that can be changed that to make our criminal justice system more equitable. Would you like me to go into those, or do you want to?
I would love that. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Okay. And these are things that we highlight in the podcast because they apply to this case in particular. One of them being that police officers should not be allowed legally to lie to suspects about what type of evidence they have. And most modern advanced democracies, police officers can't lie about what evidence they have against you. And a lot of Americans don't realize this, but if you're in an interrogation room with a police officer or a detective or whomever that thinks you committed a murder, they can say to you, I have your DNA at this crime scene. I know you were there. You might as well cooperate with me so I can try and help you, get a shorter sentence or some leniency or some type of promise that they give you. And all of that's a lie. They are 100% allowed to do that. And this is almost always how we see false confessions occur, because people, after being in an interrogation room for 19 hours and hearing that, they have my fingerprints, they have my DNA, they start to believe, well, if they really do have my DNA, I might as well, maybe it is in my best interest to cooperate and try and help myself, get the best situation out of this scenario right now. And you put that on top of if someone is young, if someone maybe has mental impairment, if someone isn't completely educated on their legal rights of having a lawyer present to represent them. It happens much more often than a lot of Americans realize. So the first being, police officers should not be allowed to lie to suspects in interrogation about what type of evidence they have against them. The second being what's called open discovery. And in this case, really briefly, there was a very likely alternative perpetrator that the prosecutors knew about, the detectives knew about, had records of this, but that information was never shared with defense lawyers because in our criminal justice system, and for the most part, in the vast majority of jurisdictions, the prosecutor gets to decide what evidence is released to the defense. So, they're supposed to share anything that they deem could be consequential to the outcome of the trial, but that's completely up to their discretion. So what happened in this case, and what has happened so many times and continues to happen, is, these detectives and this prosecutor, they already in their mind had it, it took it as fact that this was a gang rape and murder. This is what they believed. And so when they were presented later down the line in the investigation with evidence that completely contradicted that, in their head, either maliciously or non-maliciously, said to themselves, oh, well, that's not relevant because that has nothing to do with a gang scenario. And so they just chose not to share it with any of the defense lawyers. And, without that evidence, there was very little that these already inadequate defense lawyers could use to defend their clients. So two things that would make the criminal justice system more equitable: police can't lie about evidence they have on you, and that prosecutors should share all evidence with defense lawyers, so there's no possibility of under their discretion, something gets lost and that's critical to the outcome of the trial.
Thank you. Yeah, that was pretty in depth and well thought out. Yeah, absolutely. Can see a lot of those things just as you're talking. And are those things that New America being a think tank are those some of the things that you're pursuing and helping in change?
Right now, well, we've had a lot of fellows. We have a class of fellows every year that we support in doing different projects, whether it's documentary film or books. And we have had quite a few fellows that are particularly interested in and have published on issues of criminal justice reform. As a think tank, we are a nonprofit, and so legally we cannot and do not lobby. What we do is present the facts in various ways, whether that be in a white paper, in a book, in a podcast, in a blog post, whatever it may be, with the goal that there are very many powerful people in this city, and that if it reaches the right person, it might give them some perspective on the topic. So it's not like we're advocating for any type of bill or anything like that, because we can't and don't do that. But it's more so, we publish what we find and hope that it's used for good.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so for this case, I know, so the podcast out there is of course available right now to stream, all the way through. But you said you have another episode that you're going to be putting out?
Yeah, so the last episode that was published, episode 8, was published a little over a year ago now, which is crazy. And where we left it was, they're working on this pardon application. It'll be submitted sometime soon. This is what you can do in the meantime, basically, spread awareness of this case and maybe even write to your congressman or woman. But now things have changed because in July, all of those applications for a pardon were officially submitted to the Justice Department. So these pardon applications are, figuratively and literally on the desk of the pardon attorney's, on the pardon attorney's desk, and her team, could, as we speak, be looking through some of this material. And historically, presidential pardons have happened during a president's lame duck session, which is right before a president leaves for their final term. And that's exactly what we will be in after the election, in the period between November 6th and right before the next president is inaugurated, is most likely when we'll see the majority of President Biden's pardons take place. So it's really it's really game time at this point. And so this new episode talks about what went into writing those pardon applications, a little bit about what's in them. You hear from the lawyers that were part of this team writing these applications, and then of course hear from a couple of the defendants on how they're feeling at this point in time about it. So it really is kind of just like an update episode. It probably won't be as long as some of the first 8 episodes, but it was just a crucial update to, publish. And if and when more things happen with the status of the pardon, I'm sure that we'll do even more follow-up update episodes.
That's incredible. Yeah. Anything else following up on this story? I know maybe you mentioned a documentary in the works. I don't know if you want to talk about that, or if not, I can cut that out.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just, I can just keep it vague in that we are pursuing documentary film options, and have been for over a year now, because again, it's just another vehicle for these men to be able to share their stories in in a way that's finally truthful, and it is real to what happened. But it's also an opportunity to look inside the presidential pardon process, because again, that's another part of is part of our criminal justice system that very few Americans fully understand. And so that would be a big focus of the documentary film project, explaining that process and why we have it and how it usually happens. And there's just so much that goes into it. So we hope that we can, effectively communicate that to the audience.
That's awesome. Well, what about for you? Because I know you said that you're in the New America studio now, which is about to go through some renovations, some updating. So obviously you've got plans for more in the podcasting realm. Is there another project in the works right now that you're studying?
Yeah, I am working on another project, a couple of projects for New America that aren't related with criminal justice reform right at the moment. However, I, without a doubt, want to continue working in this realm, whether it be people, actually, I probably shouldn't say that because I don't know when you're going to publish this. But I'm also particularly interested in people that are wrongfully convicted and end up being executed by the state. Again, the men in the 8th and H case, the death penalty wasn't up for option, thank goodness. Right. But there are so many states where that is still a very real possibility that completely innocent people are executed by the state. And I think that's another area that I would really like to dive into and kind of expose for American listeners to realize the gravity of wrongful convictions in our country.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shannon, for taking time today to talk about the project and the impact you're having, in a lot of different areas. This is why I love these types of podcasts that are dealing with, criminal justice, but also like you guys are working towards a presidential pardon. You're also looking at, raising awareness of something that's very, very serious that still exists in our country and like something that happened specifically to this group of guys. And then there's just the industry part where it's like what you're doing in podcasting is so different than, the two people sitting on a couch just having a conversation, laughing about whatever. And so those are fun too, and they have their purpose, but I really love that things like this exist, and you're such a good storyteller, and I'm really looking forward to your next project. If people want to, follow along for, of course, Find the Alley, it's available on all of the podcast platforms that are out there. But also the New America's website, I had the domain here. Mm-hmm. You probably know it on the top of your head.
Yeah. It's newamerica.org/the alley. Yeah. You can find New America on all social media platforms. And YouTube. We have a lot of content on YouTube as well. If you want to follow me personally, you can find me on Instagram at Shannon Lynch DC, my name and where I'm from. And yeah, I just really encourage people to, of course, listen to The Alley, subscribe, rate if you feel compelled, and just, it plays a big part for the public to learn this story, but also talk about it with your friends and your legislators, so that more people know, and maybe the public pressure will help pardon be realized.
Thank you again to Shannon for sitting down and having that conversation with me. It's amazing the work that you're doing, and I really look forward to catching up with this event that happened today and try to see what the updates are on this 8th and H case and the guys that are still trying to build their lives after all of this has happened. So thank you all for listening and for watching, and make sure you subscribe. Please subscribe so that you don't miss an episode of this podcast and that you see all the future content that we put out there, whether you're on Spotify and watching us, or you're on YouTube and watching us, or you're listening to us on your favorite podcast app. We try to be both video and audio friendly, but heavy on the amount of content, and try to provide the most valuable, information for you guys as podcasters or someone who's thinking about making a podcast, what is the most valuable information for you to know about? Let's cut through, all the noise and all the advertisements, and let's just get down to what's the most beneficial thing for you to be doing right now with your time. Nothing's more valuable, right? We hope that one of those things is that you subscribe to the Arcast podcast and that you spend time listening to us every week as we bring you the latest in podcasting. And so until next time, au revoir.